Let's talk about Nick Diaz. The former Strikeforce welterweight champion, former UFC title challenger, made his long-awaited return on Saturday night at UFC 266 just to suffer a TKO loss to Robbie Lawler in what was turning out to be a very, very exciting fight, but the ending was quite bizarre, right? Diaz was stopped. Not really. He was caught with a right hand, took a knee, and then decided he did not want to continue fighting. So let's do a review of Nick Diaz's performance now that we're a day removed, basically, from his fight against Lawler. So let's get into it. All right, so before I weigh in on whether Diaz should fight or not, because that seems to be the biggest topic leaving this fight, right? It seems Twitter's split 50-50. It's usually there's a bunch of takes, but no, not in this scenario. It's either Nick Diaz should fight or Nick Diaz absolutely should not continue fighting. It seems everyone's pretty split on this one, but it seems those two are the sentiment for the future of Nick Diaz's career. So before I weigh in on what should happen next, let's take a quick look at the performance and analyze what we actually saw at UFC 266. So let's start with the positives. Let's start with the pros. Diaz went out there, right? Stepped on the cage, looked to have his skills, I wouldn't say very much intact, but somewhat close to it, right? He didn't look like a shot fighter that we've seen like others in the past, such as maybe Tyron Woodley when he was years past his prime, where he wouldn't fire a shot, right? He was just shot. He was just gun shy. That happens to many aging fighters. BJ Penn is a perfect example in his final fights where he just would just stand there. It is very normal for aging fighters to go through that. Why? I don't know. But that wasn't the case for Nick Diaz, right? Nick Diaz was clearly fighting. He was clearly having a really high output. In fact, it was higher than maybe some of the younger fighters on that card. I mean, they were going at each other nonstop. And it wasn't just sloppy boxing, right? Nick Diaz was putting combinations together, attacking the head, mixing things up to the body. He was looking good. He was moving around the cage. He was defending quite well. Yes, Robbie Lawler connected with a lot of shots, but at the same time, he was, rolling with some of the punches, blocking a lot of them. So his striking technique was there. His volume was there, which is very vintage Nick Diaz. And his defense was very much there as well, right? Obviously, the cardio was there because you cannot keep up with that high output and not, be exhausted if you're out of shape. So clearly he was in shape as far as being able to continue fighting, continue to keep up a really high pace. Also his chin, he didn't get caught with any like huge bombs from Robbie Lawler, but he wasn't just jabbed all night. He ate some really good uppercuts, some really good hooks from Lawler, who, historically has always been a very good power puncher and a knockout artist. And we know that power is the last thing to go. So Diaz showed good boxing skills. He was not shot, had a high output, and proved to have a good chin. I think also his strategy for the fight was fairly good. I think he won the first round, lost the second, but all in all, if you were to combine everything, sort of a 10-minute round Pride style, I think Nick Diaz was probably winning the entire fight, right? He was probably getting the better of Lawler. So those were my positives that I took from that fight. Now, let's talk about the negatives. Clearly, he looked a lot slower than previous fights, right? Obviously, Nick Diaz has never been a fighter that has been known to be a deadly striker with speed. A Netson Barbosa, just fast twitch muscle that can explode at any moment. Nick Diaz has always been a guy that will overwhelm you with volume, with grit, with great shot selection and technique. Not really relied too much on speed, but even then, I think we saw a much more slower Diaz compared to his previous fights. Now, let's keep in mind, he's 38 years old, right? Almost 40, and he hadn't fought in almost 7 years. I believe on February of 2022, it'll be 7 years since his last fight, obviously prior to the Robbie Lawler one. So keep that in mind, right? We got to grade him in a curve. So yes, he looked a little slower, but all in all, I think from a technique aspect, from an athletic aspect, we saw a very capable fighter. Now, I'm not saying he's going to go out there and beat Kamaru Usman as he thought he should have been matched up against, as his original opponent instead of Robbie Lawler. No, I'm not saying any of that, but he definitely had enough in the tank to not call for retirement, right? To, compete in the Legends division. I think if he were to get matched up against, Adana Cerrone, Jorge Masvidal, do a trilogy with Robbie Lawler, I think we all would have been fine. I mean, it's pretty clear that he can compete. right? So from a technique and aesthetics standpoint, and just a mechanical standpoint, I thought Nick Diaz looked quite well, to be quite honest. I thought he looked good. Again, grading him on a curve that he hadn't fought in 6 years. He's a weight class above, so naturally, whenever you move up, you're going to be a tad slower. Plus, he's 2 years away from 40, right? But I don't think that was the problem. I don't think that was the problem at that night. I don't think that's what caused Twitter to split so much. And I think a lot of people were saying he looked horrible, but I don't think that's true. I really do not think that's true. And it was kind of hard for me to put a finger on what exactly went wrong with this performance, what exactly didn't feel right about it. And what I came down to was the spirit. That Nick Diaz spirit, that malice that he carried into every fight, that he was going to hurt you no matter what, that if he could sneak in 2 or 3 shots after the referee waved off the fight, he would. That maliciousness that he was going to put hurt on you, that he was going to take you to the deep waters, that wasn't really there. You know, that also ability to keep fighting through damage, right? How many times have we seen Nick Diaz with tons of cuts on the face and still, going out there like a warrior and fight? And I'm not saying he was weak in this fight because, he took shots. I mean, you got to be tough to do that. But that Nick Diaz spirit, that street fighting style, that grit, that maliciousness, it wasn't there tonight. It wasn't there. His spirit was not there. It looked like a fighter who was fighting well and following a strategy, but not a fighter that was looking to hurt you as we're accustomed with Nick Diaz. That's what wasn't there. And I think that's what rubbed people the wrong way. I think, people didn't fall in love with Nick Diaz because of his knockout power, because of his speed, because of his volume, as we sometimes praise other fighters, right? Like, you can't, for example, look at somebody like Joel Romero and not admire that athleticism. That all those things, none of that was why really fans fell in love with Nick Diaz and his fighting style. It was really the spirit. It was the spirit. It was the spirit that regardless of who you were, whether if you were a cool dude or a chill dude, you were fighting, you signed the contract, we were enemies. And it was a war, and we were going to talk trash, and it was personal. And once we got in there, he was going to bring the pain and really put it on you and just have that, kill or be killed spirit. And that's what wasn't there. And that being such a trademark, such a personality trait of Nick Diaz, it just felt like somebody else was fighting in there tonight, but not Nick Diaz. And that was basically my assessment of the performance. Now, it leaves the question, should Nick Diaz continue fighting or not? And I think for certain fighters that are diminished, I think it's okay for them to continue fighting. That's what we call the so-called Legends division, right? That's where that term comes from, right? Like, you can see Anderson Silva box today. And look, I've covered both of his boxing fights since leaving the UFC. I was there in Mexico for his fight against Julio Cesar Chavez. I was there for his fight against Tito Ortiz. And yes, he's slower. His reflexes, are not as sharp as they were when he was champion at 185 pounds. All around, he's obviously a lesser fighter than what he used to be in his prime. But what's still there, what keeps fans going, what keeps fans from tuning in, is watching his personality, his spirit, right? That's still there. That magic, the swag, the confidence. That's all there. That Anderson Silva magic is still there. And that's why fans keep tuning into his career, even post his prime. Now with Diaz, that wasn't the case because it was quite like the opposite. His skills didn't really take a big toll. His fighting style didn't really take a big toll, but his spirit inside of the cage did. And I said this on Twitter, I want Nick Diaz to be Nick Diaz once he steps in the cage. And if he can't do that, even if he's fighting well, even if he's winning, even if he's not getting knocked out, even if he's showing up in shape and can fight 5 rounds, I just don't want to see it. I just don't want to see it because we're not talking about someone, again, that we fell in love because of their technique or, their wins or what they were able to accomplish. In fact, quite the opposite. Nick Diaz doesn't have the best record out there. If you want to look at, people his stature, right? People his with the respect that, he carries in this sport. It was really that spirit. And it's gone. Now, I don't want to say, hey, look, it's over. Nick Diaz should retire. I think there is a possibility he can summon that back if the matchup is right again. He wasn't really happy with the Robbie Lawler bout. And maybe if he was in better conditions. But as far as, surrounding the fight, he did mention it was a rough camp for him and a rough just situation for him in general. But as long as he cannot summon that, I don't want to see him in there. I don't want to sort of have my memory tainted and destroyed of what I used to or what I think of when, someone mentions the name Nick Diaz. I think something that was very sad, and it happened to BJ Penn, right? I think when you mention BJ Penn, even though he has a great legacy and nobody can take that away from him, you can't deny that it did get tainted, because you just can't erase all those terrible performances, that huge losing streak that, he had towards the end of his career. So for the sake of the sport, for the sake of that Nick Diaz, 209 spirit, I don't want him to continue fighting. Again, I'll leave a little bit of room if he's able to find that fire again. But until then, I don't think Nick Diaz should continue fighting, just to protect that memory, because Nick Diaz, there'll never be another fighter like him. And yes, I know Nick Diaz is out there, but even then, they're two different entities. They're two different people. And Nick Diaz should always be remembered for that, fighting, that warrior spirit that he brought every single time. And I don't want to remember him from anything else. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. Obviously, a very controversial topic. People seem to be very split. So let me know. Don't forget, like and subscribe. Peace.